Welcome everyone to this panel discussion on establishing a strong risk culture. The business knows where the risks are, but are they ready for GRC? Without further delay, I'll get into the questions. And really to start off this discussion, what I wanted to open up to the panel is that as an introduction, we talked about the fact that risk culture is so very different across various organizations. And what I wanted to throw open to the panel is the question, so what does risk culture mean for your organization? And what does it mean for the various parts of your organization as well? And probably, Jean, we'll start with you since you are at the head of a financial regulatory system. Maybe you can provide us some inputs and then we'll have the rest of the panel join in.
I think we just got a good example of culture is the description of the different persons.
Sure.
You saw the different way of this. So I just was thinking about that one. Perhaps we could also start with one statement is, what can happen when the risk culture is going wrong? I think risk culture can be the trigger for a lot of incidents. So that's a kind of starting point. If you want to have a definition of risk culture, I think you can get as many as we have people here in the room. So for every organization, you have to embrace what are the values you want to represent as an institution. At the Central Bank of Luxembourg, we have the notion of center of excellence, for instance. We want to be a model and an example for the financial sector. That's also why we do a lot of benchmarking ourselves against the financial sector. I think at the end, risk culture is only a consequence of the organizational culture of the institution you have. And if you want to change the culture of the risk culture, you have to start changing your institution. So a clear definition today, I think for risk culture, what you need to have is a clear vision where you want to go. You have to fix the values. People have to embrace them. The biggest, and I emphasize on this morning too, the human factor. You have to get people on board. They have to, how to get into their system. They have to input into their system those values and to live those values. That's more or less what I have to say.
Okay. So I'm not from a traditional financial services background, and coming into Legal & General, which is a PRA regulated business, it's quite interesting to see the difference in risk culture from a financial organisation to a traditional construction or property organisation. And the challenge for me as a risk professional at the moment is to translate what is a financial risk framework and financial risk culture into language which a construction company understands. The risk cultures are very, very different. That doesn't mean to say there isn't a risk culture, it's just risk is understood differently, it's practiced differently. Within a construction sector, they talk about risk all the time without realising they're talking about risk, so that's a real positive. But the challenge is to bring some conformity and regularity to it, which not only satisfies the requirements of L&G as a group, but also the requirements of the regulator. And obviously the construction industry isn't typically regulated in that sense at all anyway, historically. So big challenges around culture. Not to say that the cultures are bad, it's just different. And to say that you can change a culture overnight is you can't. It will take several years. Just coming from Royal Mail and their property function, their culture of risk has taken several years to change, and a lot of work with the people, because it is all about people and behaviours over those few years whilst I was there. So, yeah, challenges I think within our organisation, but not in a bad way. It's an exciting way. Not, it's just different.
Mr. Wren?
Yeah, as already stated. Risk culture is not something you just plug and play. You don't just write an instruction and issue that, and then from next week on Monday we will all have a strong risk culture. It is much more complex than that. Let me give you some examples. I joined a company where they had, for some years prior to me arriving, they had run some operational excellence program in order to get everybody on board, make sure that we have the right governance framework, we make sure that people did the right thing, we document our processes, we have very strong focus on all kinds of risks and controls and the framework that we work under. And that was also very fine. I was thinking, this is going to be a breeze. I'm going to kick back and be the CRO of this. This is not going to be a problem because they have all learned. But it turns out that, of course, somebody understands it. Somebody actually starts to change behavior and they start living this. But there's always a lot of areas where it doesn't really come into play, where they don't really accept it, where they probably easily forget it. Maybe because they have other things to concern about. The priorities are very different. You need to sell, you need to do this and that, and maybe this whole framework thing and incidents and business continuity and so on, it's not really on the agenda. So I've been in a couple of institutions where this works for particular areas, and then you have these foreign entities, you have these special sales organizations, particular traders, departments and so on, where it doesn't really grow in the organization as such. So this needs to come from the top. You need to, in order to change something like this, as was said, you need to change the organization maybe entirely. You need to have a strong mandate from the top, tone from the top. You need to have middle management pulling through here in order to get everybody on board. And then it's constant work. You need to just try all the time, and especially the areas where it doesn't really stick. You need to work harder on those. Carrot or stick? Yeah, sorry.
Thanks. Agree with the comments already made. Not to repeat the comments on governance and oversight being absolutely critical. Just to add one further example, what I've seen over my experience is to change the mindset of risk culture is actually changing the day-to-day objectives of staff and employees and how we actually meet the requirements of our clients and actually fulfilling those products and services to them. And not just focusing on what is achieved day in, day out, but actually putting a stake in the ground and thinking about how have we achieved that, what behaviours are in place, what is the culture to actually meet those client needs, rather than just performance on how much people have done, on how many products they've sold, but actually thinking about the how and applying that conduct, culture, and ethical lens to those behaviours.
And as we can see that through all the definitions, that there is just so much variety, and to some extent risk culture in itself is some bit of an intangible. So my next question to all of you is, how do you take this and translate into an actionable program? And I remember the conversation I had with Soren when we were discussing before this. He said that, oh, that's a one which requires almost 50 minutes or more by itself. So Soren, maybe we'll start with you and see what are the things that you've done to, in your experience, to convert it into a program.
Yeah, what have I done? and it's not all success stories. You try. You need to place the responsibility of risks with the right people. So they need to understand that what is my responsibility in my area, which are my processes, what kind of risks are there. You need management in each department to understand that. You need people to understand that. You need to have that close communication with people in an RCSA. You can't just send out a risk library, have them assess it, let it come back, do some check marks and so on, and then report this is how it is. You need also to, even though you are a second line, and I am a second line, and I should control and be independent, I see a lot of value in me actually sitting there and trying to semi-facilitate such an RCSA. Let's have the discussion. The result is not that interesting, you could say. It's merely the discussions where I have a chance to actually influence and ask the dumb questions about how does this work? Why do you do this? And don't you need an extra control here? And I can, of course, pull my things from my database saying, okay, we've seen these incidents here. We have experienced that. I've heard this from the other company. Could that happen here? It has to do with placing responsibility with the right people and people understanding that. It has to do with talking to management a lot, being close to them, having their acceptance. And luckily, I believe I have that in my company, but still, there are areas that are hard to reach. But once you have management's acceptance and they are, they have your back on issues when you go out, then it's a lot of hard work trying to be in there, provide the tools, make it very, very easy, not throw something at them where they just they fill something out, they don't know what it is, why should I do that, and then they never hear from me again. Have that close connection, but that requires a lot of resources, a lot of people, and not necessarily easy.
All right. Lois, your thoughts?
From a safety risk perspective, and I'll touch on safety risk because safety risk culture is something that I've lived and breathed for the last 20 odd years. And there's a recognised model called the DuPont-Bradley curve model, and I don't know if people have heard of that, but it's a 4-stage model of cultural change, and it goes from what we would call the reactive stage, where individuals go, well, accidents are going to happen, it's not really my responsibility. If it happens, it happens. And then it goes through another phase of, yes, there's rules which I must adhere to, I guess a compliance type environment. I must tick boxes, I must do this, but accidents will happen, but you'll see less of them because of that. It then goes through to a phase called the independent phase, where suddenly people start taking responsibility for their own actions, their own risk awareness. They understand that what I do can impact others. And then from there, which is the ultimate goal for risk safety culture, is getting to an interdependent stage where the team works together. Everybody realises that what I do not only affects me or could affect me, but it affects my colleagues, others, the company, the organisation. And that interdependent stage is such an important part of risk culture in any organisation, not just from a safety perspective, but from all risk, especially in the operational risk phase, that working together is the ultimate gain to bring together everybody's expertise, everybody's knowledge, experience, and support that both compliance side and then just that general risk awareness and cultural development. And some organisations in the construction industry are almost there. You'll go on some sites and you can see that interdependency between not just the workforce and the cleaners on site, but the management as well. The other end of the spectrum, back to that reactive stage, you'll see possibly in your own, in the local sort of house builders, that you might get into doing extension where it's sort of a shrug of the shoulders, who cares kind of thing. So the industry has gone through a massive shift change, particularly in the major builder and developer sector. But there's still a long way to go in that small builder sector.
Yeah.
Just as an example.
I jump perhaps on one issue. You mentioned the word responsibility. I would call it rather accountability. I think every single employee of our bank should be aware that the actions he makes can have an impact on the reputation. And reputation is difficult to build, but you can destroy it in a few seconds. Yeah. If this mindset, this understanding is understood by the people, I think we have achieved some important steps in direction of the culture. Now you asked the question how we have embedded or we have done this. We started the whole GRC transformation, we could call it, by awareness sessions. For the whole bank, the commitment from the top was that these sessions were mandatory for all staff. So management, everyone had to run through it, 400 people. And already there we saw a difference in the culture or in the mindset from the different people, because some people saw this as a burden to come to these sessions. Mm-hmm. And others, they came back to us afterwards and they said they were happy to have had this. They called it even sometimes training. Mm-hmm. So, and some ideas I think communication is anyway key in this endeavor, because the biggest challenge is to change the mindset of the people. But communication is key, and something we have not yet done, but could be an idea to have some incentives for people living really the risk culture that could be at the end. It's a word, it's not used in our bank, but there could be a bonus perhaps or something.
Sure. That always seems to work. Ben,
Yeah.
you're
Make it simple, make it adaptable, and allow businesses to relate actually to what you're asking them to assess. There's a couple of key things that I've seen which enabled us to be more successful. One is aligning the assessment structure. So actually, what is it you're assessing against the actual way that management see it? Align it to executive management rather than trying to merge these 5 departments together and say, well, this is what we're going to assess today, or these different functions and countries or legal entities and say, this is what we're going to assess here. Forget that and actually align it to how the businesses actually see their operations and the products that they service. Secondly, the taxonomy is critical, using language that businesses are familiar with, that they can relate to, and enables them to actually link it back, the risks back to the activities, products and services that they perform. And when we do things like an RCSA or key risk indicator monitoring or any other risk identification and assessment exercise, a risk taxonomy is vital, and a standard risk taxonomy with key English statements that businesses understand, but just as vital there are taxonomy around activities or processes and products to make it actually align with the lens of actually how the businesses fulfill their day-to-day operations.
And that's, John talks about it, you talked about it from the taxonomy perspective, and I know, Alois, you had we had an interesting conversation around communications, which is everything to do with building the awareness around risk culture. So maybe if you could give us some challenges that you've faced when it comes to communicating things like the taxonomy and so on across the organization.
Don't use the word taxonomy.
Yes, I think.
Step 1. I didn't know what that word meant until I came to L&G. I'd never heard it before. Buckets of risk, categories, something like that. No, I think communication is vital. And it's not just top-down communication, it's bottom-up. It's that engagement with the first line at all levels. And really trying to understand what their issues and concerns are on a day-to-day basis, because that's where you'll find out where the real risks are in the business. When I was at Royal Mail and the property business, we had 3,000 employees, of which 2,000 were cleaners, which trying to get across that first line operation was really quite difficult. But when we did, and when we spent the time, and when we brought them in, the number of risks, and yes, there might have been relatively small risks compared to some of the risk issues that we talked today, but they were really important to them, and really important to your risk culture to be able to talk about those risks and show that yes, we're going to control them, we're going to manage them, we're going to help you through this. And when you look at lots of little risks, it's quite quickly grow to something quite big if you're not careful. So that bottom up is really important, and then the dissemination across the business. So if you learn something in one particular part of the company, make sure you disseminate it elsewhere. The construction industry is actually very good at doing that, and there's great forums for sharing that knowledge of incidents and best practice and new ways of doing things. I would hope that the financial services sector is very similar, but being new in, obviously forums like this are great, but more of a sort of on a day-to-day basis, I hope that would happen. But that sharing of information and that communication is really important.
And, being from the financial services industry and from banks, there is a propensity to use very big terms for rather simple things. John and Ben and Soren, your thoughts on how this whole communication of the risk culture can be simplified within the organization?
Yes, I'll go ahead first. It's if we stick with the language of risk and the categories or taxonomies, making that simpler is easy. We all align to Basel reporting standards, etc., But why would we use the term with management around, as an example, execution, delivery, and process management when we really mean processing risk? That's something that management may relate to much more readily rather than thinking about complex terms. So avoid jargon, avoid ambiguity, avoid complexity as much as possible.
I think there's some terminology that should be used and can't be avoided. So something we have tried to do, and we are in the phase of doing it, is to have some risk coordinators who are more knowledgeable about these kind of terms and terminologies, and they will act as champions for the rest of the bank. So we are not the only ones preaching. There will be others for us. And I think an important element we missed till now is the notion of trust, because a lot of people do not embark because they fear if they report incidents, it could be a blaming response. So I think this is a very important aspect, that people must feel that they can trust us, so that we don't misuse the information they are willing to share with us. This is also a very important aspect you have to take into consideration.
With a small example, I have, an hour ago I was on the phone trying to close a fire because somebody had seen their name on a risk report somewhere, and they thought we had escalated something, and suddenly all hell broke loose because, what are you doing, Søren? And again, trying to understand their conception, trying to make them understand my idea that yes, you are on a list. Yes, it is because I am reporting to management on issues. It's not red. There is no problem. I'm happy. It's just my job. so that trying to talk to them and understand each other's world, that is, of course, you can't really gain trust if you don't understand their processes. Or, of course, you're not. I'm not an expert on trading and settlement and stuff like that, but I need to understand how it fits in the value chain. Right. And be able to also bring something, inspire them, come with some kind of surprises, show some links that they hadn't seen before themselves, because I have the full overview of what's going on in the business, so I can provide some information to them that they didn't know, put it into context.
Yeah. And each of you being owners of risk programs within your organizations, I think one of the key challenges is around the operationalization of that risk culture and the risk program within the organization itself. And Ben, if you can, considering your organization and the complexity across it, and we were talking about a little bit about that, if you could let us know how difficult, easy, what are the challenges that you face?
Yeah, so when we started the GRC journey that we're on today, a couple of years ago now, we obviously had predecessors to GRC that didn't necessarily talk to one another as much as we would like around RCSAs or risk identification programs or compliance testing and so on and so forth. One of the first things was to relook at that and say, well, can we better align what we do with executive management? So with all of these different assessment activities that are taking place, let's go back, let's look at the ones and two downs from the CEO and the board of directors, and actually see if we can align risk culture and risk identification and assessment activities at those levels. And then we can cascade it down. We get the sponsorship, the tone from the top right, the governance is there, then it allows for that momentum to build. Obviously maintaining that momentum and that senior sponsorship and oversight is something that we're challenged with continuously, but it's absolutely vital to have a strong risk culture embedded within the organization to align it with executive management. So some of the examples we've heard today around a 1.5 line of defense or delegation of risk and control activities, we need to try and avoid that as much as possible. Of course, we need to be practical, that sometimes we need risk and control experts to walk the way with senior managers and help them navigate complex systems, platforms, terminologies, etc. But ultimately, the decision making has to be with executive management to get it right. And we're we're continuing with this pathway, and it's something that we're looking to improve every day.
Rest, any comments on the operationalization and the challenges with that?
Perhaps in our case, we could have a little bit more to say on the strategy level, that the risk part should be integral part of the strategy decisions. I can give an example that we recently bought a new building, not taking into consideration any business continuity requirements we have. So that shows also sometimes that the culture and the mindset is not yet at the top. So I think the risk management has to have his part to say in the strategy of the bank. It's a very important element.
And we also touched upon a very important topic, and would like to delve a little bit more on that in terms of the ownership of the risk culture itself, the ownership of the risks. Any best practices that you've seen or that you've used within your programs, which has helped you do that? Anybody can...
I just mentioned the notion of risk coordinators. I think it's important that the first line understands the second line is not there to monitor or to control. They are there to advise them, to help them. But they have to understand. It's like in real life. If you make a mistake somewhere, when you drive and you have an accident, it's not the fault of the police, or that's what they have to understand. That every mistake they make on the first line, it can have an impact on their business objectives. So I think here it's a very important aspect, and we can take back from the beginning all the elements to make them aware about this state.
Lois?
I guess my take on it, it does rest with the first line, the operation of a business. The safety industry has gone, construction and safety world has gone through quite a lot of head scratching around to how you deal with that sort of operational risk. And there's very much a no-blame culture that's developed within the construction and the safety world in particular. And the reason for that is root cause analysis for events and incidents is so important, and it's so important for the learning, it's so important for risk culture generally, so that we can take the information that we get from that root cause analysis and apply it going forwards. And as soon as you get to a blame culture and you finger point that the individual that had that accident or caused that incident is to blame, you stop the learning. And I think that probably is slightly different to the way I perceive it within the financial services sector, whereas because you have the conduct aspect within the financial industry, and quite rightly. So there's differences again, I think, between my experience of risk and culture and how we progressively learn, I think, through events, and perhaps some of the financial sector's approach. Again, I'm not saying it's necessarily wrong, it's different. Sure. It's an interesting area, I have to say.
And Soren, your thoughts coming from the financial industry?
So, a couple of things that I've seen that have worked really well, including the engagement of executive management and having executive management actually accountable for issues, processes, activities, sharing lessons learned, actually being the catalyst for that when things do happen quickly is helpful. I think Jean alluded to this earlier in terms of the risk ownership from a subject matter expert, potentially second line of defence, to actually look at themes for those risk categories across the organisation. And then if there are buckets, which executive management, still being accountable for those individual items, of course, but can actually look at them horizontally, collectively, and actually say, well, do we need to change the overall process, the policies that we have, the way that we do business, or are we happy to accept where we are today and close out some of these individual items instead?
Ron, your thoughts are?
Sitting and listening to all this interesting stuff, so I totally forgot. What was the question? Communication? Or?
In terms of the ownership of the risk culture and the risk program in itself, where do you think that should lie, and your experiences with that?
Yeah, but the responsibility for the risk culture is first line. That's where the operation is. It's if you can't really pinpoint it to one person, then I guess it goes to the top, and it's a board or management responsibility for this to work well. We are the facilitators of this. We are the ones who can actually change it from second line. We can push a lot. We can nudge a lot. Make sure that provide the right tool, provide the right framework. Make sure to have the information shared. All of the good things that are said here. So of course we have a big stake in that. But ultimately, I mean, if it doesn't settle in with management, if you have a management group. It could be a live example I talk about here. If you have a management group where most of them actually accept this, but you also have a couple of them where the acceptance part is maybe less clear, then it's simply not going to work in that part of it. I can do all I want. I can issue all the good intentions and all the good instructions and all that, but it won't work unless I have management with me. So ultimately, they are also very much owners of this.
And in this entire thing, we had the M&G case study a little while back, and as they were talking about the fact that there is a split between the people aspect of it and a technology aspect of it. So how much do you see, or where do you see technology aiding the permeation, the socialization, and the communication of risk culture, even the establishment of it across the organization? And probably, Jean, you have had some experience in that area.
That's
so
typically how we embark the GRC transformation project. The tool is a mean for us to boost the maturity, to boost, perhaps also to make a kind of mind shift via the tool. It's not a magic solution. It's not said that we will achieve it, but the tool, of course, will help us to make people. It will facilitate and simplify the whole process.
Right.
If you have a manual process in place, cumbersome, people already are reluctant for the domain of risk management, then they have to do cumbersome procedures. I think they will not buy in. So we have a good feedback. I don't know if we have still time to that, but if we measure in some way the risk culture, the benefits we have, today we have more incidents reported. We have I hear on the floor sometimes people talking about risk management in the business areas, things we did not have before. So I see we have made a big progress, thanks also to the tool.
Sure. Your experiences?
Technology, it varies. You can get spreadsheet blindness, I think, in some industries. Within L&G, I think we're still on that technology journey, trying to establish what will work best for the organisation. Within the construction industry, I definitely think technology at a project and site level for risk management has come on leaps and bounds in the last 5 or so years. And augmented reality is used quite a lot as well, and that's to socialise the risk with the operatives on site. And with the project teams. So, for example, and this might be not something people have heard of, but building information management systems are visualization tools to allow project teams to visualize the risk that they might have on their projects. So clash avoidance of different parts of a building or a structure, timing risks, program risks, logistical risks. They're all operational risks that are live in the construction industry, and this technology really allows that visualization, and by being able to visualize it and the potential impact and events really helps you capture those risks and be able to control them or even get rid of them altogether.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah, and no, but I totally concur. It's also systems and tech will definitely work against you if it doesn't work. I have plenty of good examples of where we work with people, we try to improve this sound risk culture, we try to make people understand their responsibility. But if the tools that we provide to them is not easy to find and easy to work with, and you open up something and there are hundreds of fields and you don't understand half of it, and it doesn't work for them, then you can easily lose that edge that you actually had fought so hard for. So it's I see risk culture very much as it's people. It's how they behave. It's how they actually can go from being these short-term optimizing for me people and go on to actually live more company values. This is built to last for a long, long time, and I will also do my part to ensure that we do things correctly. It's very much a people thing, and then the IT needs to support that, and it needs to be easy to work with and help them.
Although, of course, technology is an enabler of new and emerging and rapidly evolving risks that we've discussed at this summit previously, it also allows us to help us beat them and actually manage them and mitigate them appropriately for all of us involved in GRC-related activities. One area or example of this is in risk identification and assessment. Technology allows us to do things more continuously. When we think about RCSA as historically being a look back or a point-in-time assessment, better tools around platforms and technologies allow us to make this more continuous, more real-time, and that enables the businesses to take action readily before larger and more systemic issues and risks occur. Data is absolutely key as part of that, so we're able to take data the business actually uses rather than doing a historic look back and linking that data to actually transforming what we may think of traditionally as a self-assessment into what we might think of as an overall health assessment. So actually say, well, is this working? Do I need to tweak anything? Can I improve this? Does this actually help me manage my business? And does it help me serve my clients on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. That's very interesting, and most of you would have heard of, one of our customers had actually implemented something called Raise Your Hand, where any part of the organization could actually report on observations around risk and compliance incidents. So that's where I think the use of technology becomes, helps you really socialize and communicate risk culture. As we would have it, the discussion is, we have almost reached our time. I think we just have about a couple of minutes to take any questions from the audience that might be there.
Hello. I just wanted to ask two questions, quick ones. How do any of you measure risk culture in your organizations? And do any of you report it? And how?
So I guess my experience, because I'm getting new into LNG, so it's a little bit difficult. We do a sort of cultural survey, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily risk culture driven. The Health and Safety Executive has a safety risk culture survey tool, which is free for anybody if they wants to go onto the HSE website to download. And actually, knowing what I do about that cultural survey, you could probably adapt it to risk more generally. And that's quite a useful one. It's used industry-wide, particularly in the higher risk sectors from a safety risk management perspective. But if you want to look at a slightly different cultural survey in the risk environment, it's probably a good one to try.
Yeah. An example could also be in the RCSA. You have areas where they see they have almost no risk, and the few risks they have, they are low impact, low probability. You don't see any incidents for them. They don't show up at risk meetings. If you have management parts of management that don't show up for meetings and take your comments into consideration, that don't actually engage, that would be a way of measuring. My answer to you is no, I don't measure it, but it's things like that I try to observe and work with. Could be good to have some kind of tool to actually measure this and put a KRI on it.
Right. I think that's all the time that we had for today. I would like to thank the panelists for taking the time out to discuss this really interesting topic. And thank you everyone here for being a part of this. And for more sessions, please stick around in this room. There are upcoming sessions coming up. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone.